Wisconsin Vegetable Garden Radio Show with your hosts, Joey and Holly Baird.
Holly, let's go to the Ivy Organics 3-in-1 Plant Garden Hotline and bring in our guest for the week.
Yeah, Teri Chace is a writer and editor with a broad range of expertise and interests. She has a taste for exploration and a talent for bringing back stories and information that resonate with insight and wonder, whether she's examining flowers, pie, or small-town life. Welcome to the program, Teri.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join Holly, myself, and all of our listeners, not only to enlighten us, but educate all of us with your garden knowledge.
I guess we're not going to talk about pie then.
No, we're going to bypass that.
Okay.
As someone who encourages others to plant trees, what are some good tree planting tips, but also tips on how to pick the appropriate tree to plant?
Well, first thing I want to say is this is not the best time of year to plant a tree. But there's been new information on tree planting in recent years, and the conventional wisdom is to dig a wide hole, not a deep hole, because tree roots spread outward. So it's been past misconception. You have to dig a nice deep hole and fill it with compost. You actually shouldn't do that either. You shouldn't fill it with compost. You should use the native soil, because the tree will not leave the hole that you filled with compost if you fill it with compost. It has to be able to spread out as much as it can. So 2 things: wide hole, not deep, and fill it with the native soil.
Well, let's talk about staking, because everybody seems to want to stake these trees down like they're a radio tower, and they don't want these things to blow away, but that's really not recommended either.
It's not recommended because then the tree becomes dependent on it.
And then if we was to stake the tree, and let's talk about mulching too. If we stake the tree, what is the proper way in which to stake a tree? And then is mulch required or recommended for the base around the tree?
Okay, question number 1 about staking. First of all, I wouldn't stake a little tree at all unless you're in a very windy spot. But if you are going to stake it, the important thing is that the way you tie it to the stakes, whether you're using guy wires or rope or whatever, it should not abrade the bark. It should be something soft. I mean, I've even used T-shirt fabric.
And then about 6 months or so is about the time length you want to remove that, or what's the indication?
Well, I don't even recommend staking at all,
right,
as I said, But if you do, you want to remove it after its first season so that it can really grow on its own 2 feet, so to speak.
Well, let's talk about the mulch. We've heard the term volcanic mulch, and we know that that's not a good thing at all when they mulch all the way up 2 foot up the stem or the trunk.
Oh my God, I hate that.
and we have.
I don't know where that came into fashion.
No, and cities and municipalities do this. Not everybody does it, but these people are supposed to know what they're doing. They mulch the stuff up the stalk or the trunk, and it actually is detrimental to the tree.
Right, and it also, they don't plant the tree deeply enough. I mean, the tree should be planted at ground level, not up on a little hill, which exposes its root system to cold weather, or damage, people walking on it, or dogs, or whatever, So look at the way a tree grows in nature and how they prosper. You want to kind of imitate that.
Yeah, it's just a couple of simple, a few minutes. Just if you're uncertain, look it up, and you can save everybody a whole lot of hassle because you've done the job right the first time.
Amen, brother. Also, I want to say about mulch, because I didn't answer that. Yes. Mulch is always a good idea. It's never a bad idea. It keeps weeds down. It holds in soil moisture. It's a good thing. I would just caution people never to buy that red dyed mulch, because then the red dye leaches into the soil.
And that's definitely good to know.
Yeah, and with your experience, is pretty much any dyed mulch not good, or is it just specific colors with that toxicity?
I wouldn't do it at all. I just wouldn't. It doesn't look natural, and yes, there is the risk of the dye causing harm to the plant.
Okay, definitely good to know. Now, a lot of people don't know when to fertilize their vegetable garden. When is the best time to fertilize your vegetable garden?
Not right now, not in the fall, because, it'll just be gone by spring. Fall is the time to clean up your vegetable garden and take everything out of it. Don't leave any plant parts in there to, rot and harbor pests and diseases. just do a good cleanup. But the time to fertilize is in the spring. And I'm not much for fertilizing a vegetable garden. I think it's better to just build up the soil to be organically rich.
Well,
but if you were going to, it would be in the spring. Yeah.
We have this question coming a lot, and we've answered the best way we know how. People have invasive species in their yard. One being here in southeast Wisconsin is called Creeping Charlie. What is the best? What is your suggestions on how to get rid of these invasive species, preferably without using harmful chemicals? Do you have any tips for us and our listeners?
I have many, many tips. I wrote a whole book about this. It's called How to Eradicate Invasive Plants. I wanted to call the book something, more fun, like The War of the Weeds. And I told my publisher I didn't want to mention chemicals at all, and they said, you really have to talk about Roundup. So I talk about all the other things you can do to fight Creeping Charlie and other invasive plants, and Roundup as an absolute last resort. The reason I say Roundup is an absolute last resort is because it's a very controversial chemical, and current research is showing it lingers in the soil and harms soil microorganisms, and it gets into the water and harms other creatures too. So let's not use Roundup if we can avoid it. There are many alternatives. If you're going to fight invasive plants, the first thing I would suggest doing is finding out exactly what you're dealing with. In other words, know thy enemy. Look up the plant, get the proper ID. And then this is the same thing generals do when they're going to war. They study their enemy and the enemy's habits. We're going to war here, friends. So my advice with invasive plants is first get a firm ID on what it is, and then look it up in my book or another book and find out how it reproduces, because obviously the first order of business is to keep it from spreading. Yeah. And then there are many, many non-toxic things you can do to fight invasive plants, from pulling them up to smothering them to harming them with things that are not as harmful as Roundup.
Now, we've heard the term solarization. Is that a means that is fairly effective in killing these invasive plants that are in our yard or even our garden?
Yes, it works for some things. Solarization is a technique whereby you dig everything out, getting as much of the root systems as you can. You probably know the hard way, a lot of us do, that when you dig out a weed or another plant that you don't want, if you leave even a little bit of root system in there, it can regenerate. I mean, one definition of a weed or invasive plant is a very successful plant. Anyway, so then after you've got it out of there and disposed of all the weeds that you could get rid of, then you cover over the area with clear plastic and anchor down the sides. And what happens is, I wouldn't do that this time of year, I'd do it in the spring or summer, but the hot sunshine kind of bakes what's underneath.
Now, you say clear plastic. I have heard recommendations, and you correct me because that's why we have you on the show. I've heard black plastic also works. Is one better than the other, or reasons being clear?
It's worth trying either or. If you have a place in hot, direct sun, clear plastic is probably worth trying first, just because it's really going to get baked. But if you have a place that's part sun, part shade, or you don't have any clear plastic, I mean, for clear plastic, I've even used old shower curtains, But green plastic, black plastic is fine too. Just be sure to use the heavy-duty stuff and to anchor down the sides real well so that the wind doesn't blow it up. I put rocks all over it.
Right, you want to seal this thing down because you don't want the air or the heat to evaporate. That's what your tool is.
Right.
Is the heat.
For example, just a personal thing. I have a front bed out in front of my house that had a very irritating plant called Bishop's Goutweed. It comes in green leaves or in variegated ones. You may know this thing. It's really hard to get rid of. And I dug it out to a depth of 6 inches. And then I covered it with black plastic and anchored it down with rocks. And I've left it there for 3 years. It's so hard. I'm so impatient. I want to get in there and put in good new soil and desirable plants, but I just want to be totally sure that the stuff underneath is good and dead.
And that's the key, digging it out, because, and this is what we tell gardeners, why you may have so many weeds is because you till and then you cut those root divisions up, and all those root divisions now propagate into more weeds, and now you've got a nice forest of weeds.
Or if you till, you bring weed seeds to the surface, it's astounding. I mean, there's some weeds that they can remain dormant in the soil for decades. It's kind of scary. I wanted to mention too, Joey, this is really important when you're fighting weeds and you're pulling them out. Here again, don't do what I did. So I was pulling out the aforementioned Bishop Scoutweed in handfuls by the roots. I was being really careful to get as much of the roots as I could. And then I flung it over the other side of the driveway into the ditch, which was incredibly stupid because guess what? Next spring, there was a new colony. Yeah. So I want to say to anybody fighting weeds, don't put them in the compost. The compost pile might not get hot enough to kill the plants. They might just, take over your growing in your compost happily. Throw them in the garbage. Send them away with the municipal garbage. In some communities, there's a thing called a green bin. I don't know if you have that out there. A green bin is for putting organic waste out to the curb. But don't even put your weeds in there, because what the municipality does when they take the green bin, the organic waste away, is they put it in a municipal compost pile. Then one of your neighbors comes down there to get some compost, and you just move the problem around. So literally put weeds in the garbage.
Same thing with diseased plants too. Get rid of them. Don't compost them. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Don't. I mean, it seems like a little bit of extra work, but not if you have hefty trash bags right out there by where you're working. If you have a plant like Bishop Scoutweed or Creeping Charlie that is taking over a flower bed, and it's really hot, you don't want to kill the good things. You only want to kill the pest plant. It's a little bit harder. I mean, sometimes what people have had to do is dig out the daylilies by the roots and move them to another part of the yard temporarily, and then just assault the whole entire area and get all the Creeping Charlie or Bishop Scoutweed or whatever out of there and start over. It takes patience, but, there's a lot of things that can work.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we really have enjoyed you on the show. How and where can we find out more about you?
Well, you can look me up on Amazon, where my books are for sale, including the one about invasive plants and some other ones. I'm under Teri Chace. That's Teri with one R and Chace with two C's, CHACE. Or you can go to my website, which has a lot of information, and that's TeriChaceWriter.com.
Well, I want to address your in your book, Seeing Seeds: A Journey into the World of Seedhead Pods and Fruit. You talk about all types of plants and their seeds. What is a fun surprise or fact about seeds that you learned while doing research on that book?
Oh, I love that book. It's such a beautiful book. You wouldn't think that seeds could be so beautiful, but the photographer did some remarkable work. When you go through that book, it just takes your breath away. The photography is so beautiful. And he took a really good picture of an acorn, and so, of course, I had to write about acorns, and this was my favorite story. So, and I was thinking about this this very day when I was out walking my dog before I got on the phone with you guys, that a lot of oak trees are dropping their acorns all over the sidewalks right now, and it made me think. Now, squirrels are gathering up acorns, as they do every fall, and they make little stashes of them here and there, and I found one once in the park. It was about 24 acorns, kind of in a little hollow. And that's because the squirrels want to come back later and eat them, right? But really what they're doing is they're planting them. And why don't they sprout, I wondered. You mean, an acorn isn't really a seed, literally. What it has is it has some meal around it, to nourish the embryo deep inside. So this is what I learned about acorns that is so interesting. The embryo is in the seed, is inside the acorn, and the squirrel's gathering it up and planting it. Well, they don't want it to sprout either, because then the developing embryo sucks up all those resources, and you don't have anything good to eat if you're the squirrel. So squirrels bite off the end of the acorn, not every single one. Now, you take a close look at one of their stashes, you'll see some of the ends are bitten off. What they're trying to do is bite off the end with the embryo, so then the acorn will just never sprout, okay? But what's so interesting is over I don't know what I want to say, geologic time, over centuries, some oak trees have responded to the squirrels doing this by scooting their embryo further back inside the acorn.
Huh.
Isn't that bizarre? All these things are going on out there in the world that we aren't really aware of. You know, you walk down the sidewalk and step on the acorns or watch the squirrels gathering them, but it's really a dynamic situation.
Sometimes
really interesting.
Nature can take care of itself whenever
yes.
other things has tried to prevent it from occurring.
Right.
Well, Teri,
so some will sprout and some will not.
Well, Teri, we greatly appreciate the time you've given us on the program and sharing your knowledge with not only Holly and myself, but all of our listeners.
Well, thank you for having me. That was a quick tour of all kinds of interesting things. But if you want to learn more, by all means, take a look at my books. And you can also reach me through my website if you have any questions.
Absolutely. Well, Teri, thank you very much.
For more information, please visit thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.